Do not touch me, Polly said as the broken star badge tore the lace of her sleeve and Joshua caught her bleeding hand. Still in her white wedding dress, her leather suitcase resting against the wooden porch post, she tried to pull back and found him loosening his grip before she even had to fight. Then Polly saw her dead mother's name scratched into the back of the metal star, and she asked if the cowboy she had just been forced to marry was chosen to protect her or to silence her. The late sun of 1879 stretched long shadows across the Donovan Ranch near the Indian Territory border. Polly Quaid, 28, stood rigid beneath Joshua's hand, less like a bride than a woman measuring the distance to the nearest trees. Joshua felt her pulse leap against his calluses and saw her shoulders brace for the pull of a husband claiming church-sanctioned rights. He opened his hand and let her go. "I'm not going to hold you, Mrs. Donovan," Joshua said, his voice a low, steady gravel. He glanced down at the blood blooming across her torn white lace. "But I'd ask you to let me wrap that before it stains the leather of your bag." Polly stepped back, cradling her hand. Inside his canvas coat hung an old marshal's star with one point snapped away. The wind had turned it enough to expose the name scratched across the back. Quaid. Her mother's name. "Who gave you that?" she asked, her voice sharp, stripped of any bridal warmth. "Did Barnaby Garrett hand it to you, along with the marriage certificate?" Joshua reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean cotton handkerchief. He did not step toward her. He held it out, waiting. "Barnaby Garrett doesn't give me anything I don't pay for. And he didn't give me this." "Then why do you have it?" "Because it reminds me of what a man looks like when he thinks a piece of tin gives him the right to drag people out of their homes," Joshua said evenly. "May I?" Polly hesitated. Her palm stung, but the fear of being handled cut deeper. For 3 days, Aunt Bertha and the church council had used her mother's old disgrace to push her into this marriage. Barnaby had chosen quiet, respectable Joshua Donovan to keep a scandalous woman's daughter in line. She reached out and snatched the handkerchief from his fingers. She wrapped it around her own hand, pulling the knot tight with her teeth. "I am not sleeping under your roof, Mr. Donovan. I am taking my bag and walking back to town." Joshua hooked his thumbs into his belt. He didn't block the steps. He didn't raise his voice. "You can walk anywhere you please, but Barnaby's men are camped near the South Creek crossing. If he wanted you safe in town, he wouldn't have stood in that chapel making sure I said I do." Polly stiffened. She looked toward the darkening road. "There's a room inside," Joshua said, turning his back to her and pulling open the heavy oak door of the ranch house. "It has a deadbolt on the inside. I sleep in the tack room by the barn. You leave at dawn if you want, but don't walk into Barnaby's hands in the dark just to prove you don't belong to me." He lit the kerosene lamp, then crossed the house and left through the back door. Warm light spilled across her white dress as the latch clicked behind him. Polly stood alone on the porch. She looked at her suitcase, then at the open front door. Slowly, she picked up her bag, stepped over the threshold, and slid the heavy iron bolt into place. Before sunrise, Joshua checked the calves' pitched hay and helped his 2 hands move the herd toward the western water draw. He did not look toward the house until the work was done. When he walked up to the back porch, he scraped his boots deliberately loud against the iron grate. He knocked once, stepped back, and waited. The door opened. Polly had traded the white lace for a dark blue skirt and stiff-collared shirtwaist. Her hair was drawn painfully tight. On the cot behind her, the suitcase stood barely unbuckled, ready to close at a moment's notice. Joshua reached into his vest pocket and held out an iron key. "For the front door," he said. "The bolt is good for the night, but this keeps the wind from blowing it open during the day." Polly looked at the key, then at him. "You are giving me the key to your house." It's not much of a house if you're trapped in it. She took it, her fingers brushing his calluses, and slipped it into her apron pocket. I need to go to the mission house. I have a sewing class for the ranch girls on Saturdays. They rely on it. I'll saddle the mare, Joshua said, turning away. I can drive a wagon myself, Mr. Donovan. Joshua paused. He looked back over his shoulder, a faint, dry smile touching the corners of his mouth. I know you can, but a wagon rides rough over the rutted trail, and it's a 2-hour walk. I figured you might want to save your hands for sewing. He didn't wait for an argument. He walked to the barn and hitched the buckboard. When he drove it around, he didn't offer his hand to help her up. He merely held the brake steady until she climbed onto the wooden seat herself. At the weathered mission house, Polly found a brass padlock, an iron chain, and a council notice nailed to the door. The notice declared the school closed, pending a review of its instructor's moral standing. Joshua read over her shoulder without crowding her. Polly's hands dropped to her sides. Her breathing went shallow. He closed it. Barnaby closed it. He doesn't own this building, Joshua said quietly. He owns the council, Polly said, fury shaking her voice. He told me marriage would prove I was respectable enough to teach. I did what they wanted. I married you, and he locked it anyway. Joshua wanted to break the lock. Then he saw Polly waiting for another man to take charge of her life. I won't break it, Joshua said. Not unless you ask me to. It's your school, Polly. Your door. She stared at him, the wind whipping a loose strand of hair across her cheek. He had called her Polly, not Mrs. Donovan, and he was waiting for her instruction. Hooves approached. Barnaby Garrett rode in with 2 hands a silver watch chain across his vest and the certainty of a man who owned the town's debt. Morning, newlyweds, Barnaby called out, not dismounting. He looked at the padlock, then at Polly. I see you found the notice, Mrs. Donovan. You have no right to close my class, Mr. Garrett, Polly said, stepping to the edge of the porch. Her spine was steel again. The council must protect its youth, Barnaby said. Given your sudden marriage and your mother's signed confession, we suspended the lessons. Confirm her transgressions before the congregation tomorrow, show proper humility, and we may reconsider. Polly went pale. Her mother's confession had been a lie, a piece of paper extorted by the council years ago to protect a man with influence. To confirm it publicly would be to bury her mother's name forever. Barnaby shifted his gaze to Joshua. You're a quiet man, Donovan. A good influence. Did you happen to find an old piece of metal in your bride's belongings? Something her mother might have stolen. Joshua felt the weight of the broken star against his ribs. He didn't reach for it. He stepped off the porch and stood between the horses and the steps, placing himself directly in Barnaby's line of sight, forcing the older man to look at him instead of Polly. I don't search my wife's belongings, and I don't answer for her, Joshua said. Ranch business comes to me. School business goes to Polly. Threats are welcome nowhere. Barnaby's eyes narrowed. I put you in that church, Joshua. Don't forget that. I was there, Joshua replied flatly. I remember. Barnaby yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. Tomorrow morning, Polly. The council expects you. He spurred his horse and rode off, his men trailing behind. Joshua stood in the dust for a long moment before turning back to the porch. Polly was staring at him, her arms wrapped tight around her waist. He knows you have it, she whispered. The star. He suspects, Joshua corrected. He walked up the steps and offered her his arm, not insisting, just leaving it there. Let's go home, Polly. That afternoon, Polly did not stay in her room. She walked out to the barn where Joshua was oiling a saddle. She stood in the doorway, the harsh sunlight framing her silhouette. "I bought a ticket on the Monday morning stagecoach to St. Louis," she said. The words were clipped, rushed. "I have enough saved. I won't stand in that church and lie, and I won't let him use me to trap you." The news struck Joshua like a kick, but he kept oiling the leather. He had expected the suitcase to leave from the moment he saw it. "St. Louis is a long way," he said softly. "It's out of Barnaby's reach." Joshua set down the rag. "Barnaby put the star and your mother's truth under one roof so he could watch both. Leave before Monday, and his men may pull you from the stage before it crosses the county line." "So I am your prisoner?" "No." Joshua walked toward her, stopping a full 3 feet away. "You bought a ticket. I won't stop you from getting on that coach. I will ride beside it myself until you are out of the territory if that's what you want. But I'm asking you not to run blind." She looked at him, searching his face for a lie, for the controlling grip she had come to expect from the men in this town. She found only a quiet, steady presence. "Why did you marry me?" she asked. "Aunt Bertha said Barnaby would run you out of town unless you found a respectable name." Joshua leaned against the stall. "Mine was mostly doing nothing. I figured you could use it a while." Polly looked away, the fight draining out of her. "I need to get my sewing machine from the mission house. There's a back window that's loose." "I'll hitch the wagon," he said. On the return trip, Joshua handed Polly the reins. She drove while he sat beside her with the Winchester across his knees. They lifted the Singer machine thread box and children's slates through the loose back window. On the road home, a girl's notebook tumbled down an embankment. Joshua climbed after it, returned the dusty book without shaming her angry father, and resumed the journey. Polly noticed that he helped without turning kindness into a performance. That evening, a cold wind drove red dust across the ranch as they unloaded the wagon. Joshua held out his canvas coat. "Wind's got a bite to it," he said. He didn't drape it over her shoulders. He just held it, offering. Polly looked at the coat, then at the biting wind. For the first time, she didn't see an offer of help as a trap. She reached out and took it, slipping her arms into the sleeves that dwarfed her. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and him. It was warm. "Thank you," she murmured. When she went into her room that night, she didn't push her leather suitcase flush against the door to block it. She left it sitting at the foot of the bed. Saturday's church supper filled the town hall with roasted beef perfume and whispered gossip. Barnaby sat across from the newlyweds, cutting his meat in hard strokes. "So, Joshua," Barnaby said loudly, ensuring the surrounding tables fell quiet. "How is married life treating a confirmed bachelor? Must be a shock having someone else's opinions under your roof." Joshua took a slow sip of his coffee. "Well, Barnaby, the only one who usually argues with me at the ranch is my cattle dog, and he mostly complains about the hours. Polly's a damn sight prettier, and her conversation is better." Nervous laughter moved down the table. Joshua had used humor to shield her without silencing her, but Barnaby wasn't deterred. "It's good you can joke, though I imagine the suddenness of the arrangement must be taxing, especially with the rumors about the haste. Some might say a woman needs a firm hand to guide her away from the sins of her past." Joshua set down his cup. The click silenced the table. "Marriage doesn't make my wife public property, Barnaby," Joshua said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the silverware rattle. "And it doesn't make her past an appetizer for your dinner." Barnaby flushed. "I am the head of the church council, Donovan. I have a right to inquire. You have a right to eat your beef." Joshua cut in smoothly. He didn't lean forward. He didn't puff up his chest. He just sat there, an immovable object. Joshua looked at Polly and left the answer to her. Polly felt the eyes of the entire room on her. She thought of her mother shrinking under these same stares, signing a lie because no one had offered her a choice. Polly sat up perfectly straight, her chin raised. "My classes will resume on Monday, Mr. Garrett," Polly said, her voice ringing clear in the quiet hall. "And the memory of my mother is not a parlor trick for your entertainment." She rose. Joshua pulled back her chair and walked beside her from the hall, his hand light at her back. They rode back to the ranch in silence, under a canopy of cold, brilliant stars. When they reached the porch, Polly didn't immediately go to her room. She stood on the wooden boards, the wind pulling at her hair. "Did you marry me out of pity, Joshua?" she asked. The armor was gone from her voice, leaving only a raw, exhausted question. "Or because you owe Barnaby money?" Joshua tied the horse, leaned against the porch rail, and opened his palm. Moonlight caught the broken star. "This belonged to my father," Joshua said quietly. "He was the town marshal before the war, a man who believed the badge made him right no matter what he did." Polly looked at the star, then up at his face. The shadows hid his eyes, but his voice was tight. "One night," Joshua continued, "Barnaby Garrett paid my father to evict a woman from her claim. No warrant, just force. My father dragged her out into the snow. She fought back. She scratched her name into the back of his badge with a sewing awl before he hit her." Polly's breath caught. "My mother." "Your mother. I was 17 and watched it happen. That night I broke the point off with farrier's tongs and threatened to expose him." Joshua looked at the star. "Barnaby forced your mother to sign the adultery confession so no one would believe her. Then he used my father's crime to keep me quiet." Polly closed her eyes. The missing piece of the puzzle fell into place, heavy and suffocating. "So he forced us to marry, to put the evidence and the witness in the same house, to keep us both under his thumb. He expected me to silence you to protect my family name." Joshua pocketed the star. "I carry it so I remember what power can do in a cruel man's hands. I did not marry you out of pity. I married you because I would not watch Barnaby repeat my father's crime." He took a step closer, stopping just outside her reach. "You aren't something that needs fixing, Polly. You don't have to carry her shame. So tell me, if you didn't have to fight Barnaby, if you didn't have to run, what do you want?" Polly looked across the dark ranch. "I want a school where girls learn to read without proving they are pure enough to deserve it. A place with no confession stand." Joshua nodded slowly. "Then build it." The question of the Monday stagecoach hung in the air between them, unspoken but pressing. Sunday morning arrived with the heavy tolling of the church bell. Polly wore her stiffest dress. She did not pack her bag, but she hadn't unpacked it either. The chapel was packed. Barnaby waited behind the pulpit with a rolled parchment as whispers followed Polly and Joshua to a front pew. Before the hymn ended, Barnaby unrolled the parchment. "We are a community built on truth. This letter bears the confession of a woman who tried to seduce a lawman, then invented lies when he refused her." His eyes fixed on Polly. "That sin remains uncleansed." Barnaby pointed a thick finger at Polly. "Mrs. Donovan, your school is a privilege granted by this council. If you wish to retain it, you must come forward, acknowledge your mother's signed confession, and ask this congregation for the grace to continue." It was the ultimate trap. Confess to the lie and lose her mother's memory, or refuse and lose her school and her place in the town. Polly gripped the wooden pew in front of her, her knuckles white. She opened her mouth, but before she could draw breath, Joshua stood up. He didn't step into the aisle. He stood right where he was, towering over the congregation. "Put the paper down, Barnaby," Joshua said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade. "This is council business, Donovan," Barnaby warned. "It's my family's business," Joshua said. "Barnaby dictated that confession after paying my father, Marshal Donovan, to assault Polly's mother and steal her claim." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Aunt Bertha, sitting 2 pews back, buried her face in her hands. "That is a lie," Barnaby roared, his face purpling. "You would drag your own dead father's name through the mud to protect this." "I broke the star from his chest myself." Joshua tossed the badge onto the wooden communion table. It struck with a hard, metallic clatter that rang beneath the rafters. "My father was a thug with a badge, and you are a coward with a ledger. Cancel my contracts. Call my loans. You will not use our family's shame to force my wife into a lie." One of Barnaby's ranch hands, a hot-headed kid with a gun slung low, stood up in the back row. "You calling Mr. Garrett a liar, Donovan? Maybe you need to step outside." Joshua turned his head slowly. He didn't reach for the Colt at his hip. He didn't widen his stance. He just looked at the kid with the hollow, terrifying calm of a man who had seen real violence and had no desire to play games with it. The church went so still that the faint creak of the boy's gun belt sounded loud. "Sit down, son," Joshua said softly, "before you do something that breaks your mother's heart." The kid swallowed hard and sank back into his pew. Joshua stepped back and cleared the aisle for Polly. He had exposed his own family. The final answer remained hers. Polly stood up. She looked at Barnaby, then at the congregation. She did not look ashamed. She looked magnificent. "I will not confirm a lie," Polly said, her voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. "My mother was an honest woman who was broken by greedy men. I will not teach under the authority of a council led by one of them." She walked down the center aisle without hurrying. Joshua fell into step beside her, neither leading nor following, and together they entered the Sunday light. By that afternoon, the Donovan ranch was no longer quiet. 3 outer ranch families brought their daughters to Joshua's property, choosing Polly's lessons over the council's permission. Polly decided to start with a riding lesson in the large round pen. She wanted the girls to know how to handle a horse if they ever needed to leave quickly. Joshua brought out 3 gentle mares, checked every cinch, then leaned against the fence and left the teaching to Polly. "The first thing you must learn," Polly told the girls, her voice carrying across the dusty pen, "is that you are in control. If the horse steps into your space without permission, you say no. Clearly. Do not ask. Tell." Joshua smiled faintly, tipping his hat down to block the sun. She was teaching them exactly what she had fought for herself. One of the small ponies, notorious for being mouthy, leaned over the fence and snatched Joshua's Stetson right off his head, trotting away with it clamped in its teeth. Polly stopped at Joshua's bare-headed surprise, then laughed, bright, unguarded, and warm enough to tighten his chest. He chuckled and climbed the fence after his hat. After the lesson, Polly found her stage money on the porch table beneath a horseshoe. Joshua had neither hidden it nor reclaimed it after church. Her escape remained open. Polly didn't touch the envelope. She walked into the house looking around the quiet, solid walls. She looked at the door to her room. The key he had given her was still in her pocket. Monday morning broke with a crisp, clear sky. The stagecoach was due to pass the crossroads at 8 o'clock. Joshua led a saddled bay to the porch, tied her to the post, and stopped at the steps. Polly was standing there. Her leather suitcase was sitting by the wooden post, exactly where she had placed it on their wedding day. She was wearing her dark traveling skirt. Joshua felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. He had known this was a possibility. He had promised not to cage her.
He reached into his vest, pulled out the envelope of money, and set it on top of the suitcase. "The mare is yours," Joshua said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "She's steady. She'll get you to the crossroads in plenty of time." Polly looked at the horse, then at the envelope, and finally at him. "You defended me. You ruined your standing with Barnaby. You could lose this ranch."
"I'll manage," Joshua said. He looked at her, refusing to hide his truth behind a joke this time. "I want you to stay, Polly. I want to hear that sewing machine running in the evenings. I want to see you teach those girls to stand their ground. I want you." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I won't use a piece of paper signed in a church by a corrupt council to keep you here. If you stay, I want it to be because you walked through that door on your own." Polly's lifelong armor, sharp words, suspicion, readiness to flee felt suddenly heavy. Joshua had asked, before touching, handed her the reins, and taken public judgment without stealing her answer. She lifted the envelope. The coins shifted inside as the red road stretched toward a city where no one knew her mother's name. For one aching moment, flight felt safer. The old warning returned. Leave before kindness becomes command. Joshua's hands remained loose at his sides. He reached for neither her bag nor her answer. He had given her the horse, the money, and the road. Staying was not surrender now. It was the first choice no one had cornered her into. She set the envelope back on the suitcase and unbuckled the leather straps. Right there on the porch, Polly opened the bag. She took out her wooden slate. She took out her box of thread. She took out the white lace dress. She closed the empty suitcase, picked up her belongings, and turned toward the house. She paused in the doorway and looked back over her shoulder. "Does the lock on my door still work?" she asked. "It will always be your room," Joshua said, his breath catching. "As long as we live here." "I will not stay here as a debt," Polly said fiercely. "Then stay here as my choice," Joshua replied. "If you want to." Polly walked back across the porch. She stopped in front of him. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't brace herself. For the first time, she reached out and laid her hand, the one with the healing cut on the palm, over his. She laced her fingers through his, holding on tight. "I want to say the vows again," Polly whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Not in Barnaby's church. Here, just us. Where can I choose to say them?" Joshua looked down at their joined hands. He didn't pull her into a desperate embrace. He simply turned his hand over, securing his grip gently around hers. "All right," he said the words, carrying a lifetime of relief. That Monday, Aunt Bertha gave the original council minutes to the circuit judge. They proved Barnaby had ordered the eviction and dictated the confession. Within 3 weeks, the council removed him, the bank called his debts, and the town stopped lowering its eyes. Polly did not wait for Barnaby's fall or the town's apology. She was already busy. On a warm Tuesday evening, Aunt Bertha and several ranch families gathered at the Donovan porch. On a small wooden chair near the door rested the broken star badge, not as a threat, but as a promise that the past was done. In a simple blue dress, needle still tucked into her apron string, Polly faced Joshua beneath the open sky. No preacher stood between them. Polly took a step forward. She reached out and took Joshua's hand. "I, Polly Quaid, choose you, Joshua Donovan," she said, her voice steady and clear. "To stand beside, to build with, of my own free will." Joshua looked at the woman holding his hand. He remembered the first time he had touched her, the way she had pulled away in fear. He looked at her now, her grip strong and certain. I, Joshua Donovan, choose you, he replied, his thumb brushing the faint scar on her palm. To protect, but never to hold back. To love, as long as I have breath. He didn't lean in to claim a kiss for the crowd. Their eyes met, quiet and certain, making the gathered families seem far away. He simply held her hand on the porch where she had once planned to run, knowing she had finally found a place where she wanted to stay.